Well, thank you for having me. I just want to flag that how excited I am to be here to be part of this. Lydia and Grace are some of the newest team members out in the Atlantic provinces in ACENET, and they're doing fantastic things around training and humanities social sciences support. So I'm excited to be part of that, especially since some of my work has pulled me away from that for a while. So I'm happy to get back into it today and happy to show you some tips and tricks, particularly because the Digital Humanities Summer Institute didn't happen this year. And I know that you're planning one for next year in the Atlantic provinces, DHSI Atlantic or some such thing. So hopefully this is a bit of a precursor to that. It's exciting. So let's get rolling. As Lydia pointed out, questions, you can feel free to ask them throughout. I'll have the chat up in my second window on my second screen here, and I'll try to answer them as it makes sense to do so. We have baked into today about 30 minutes at the end where we can have a discussion about specific projects. The only request there is let's try not to have it take up all the 30 minutes with one project. But if you have a few questions, might this work? I've been thinking about this. We didn't talk about this today. How might I get that information? That's exactly the place for that. We're going to be using Python today. And in the the preamble or the boilerplate text for this session, I did make the promise that you should be able to get up and running quickly with this, or at least soon. After today. So I'm going to do what I can to have you follow along and help out here. And I, as much as there were about 100 people who signed up for this, there's only about 38 who have actually signed up to attend today. So I think we'll be able to move further and faster than we would have otherwise, because I'm much more comfortable with this number sharing some of my credentials for the short period of time. And we'll cover that when we get to it. A big part of this today will be Python, right? So it'd be helpful for me right now if in the chat you would put a yes or a no in terms of, are you comfortable working with Python? Yes or no? And it's totally fine if you're not, because this is built for people who are not comfortable working with Python. I see a ton of no's coming up there, so thank you very much for being honest. However, you are going to see what it looks like. And I'm going to show you what I know is the softest, easiest way to get started with it. We're going to use a set of tools around, let's call it a framework, I'll be sloppy here, called Jupyter Notebooks. And what this is going to do is put a Python programming environment in your browser. If we were doing this 1 year ago, 2 years ago or more, and we were doing this in person, we would install this software on your computer. And it would inevitably be the case that one person, maybe 2 or 3, rarely more than 5 in a workshop of about 20 to 30 people would have installation problems. And that would eat up so much time. Google, however you feel about Google, one good thing that they do is they provide a tool called the Google Collaboratory. And so this is going to allow us to open a Python Jupyter Notebook environment in our web browser. It's where I'm going to run today's code, and I'm going to show you how to open it up and how to follow along. Everything that I do today, once we load it, you have access to it as well. So even if you can't do it today, then you'll be able to access it later. And you'll be able to go through the recording to see that, and also drop a few of the important links inside the Google Doc where you've all put your names so that you can follow along there as well. Why Python? Well, there's lots of programming languages out there. And Python has 2 powerful properties that people in the humanities and social sciences find very attractive. The first is, we often don't have a programming background, where we often end up being self-taught, or there's a few special digital humanities programs or experts around, and maybe we do some mentoring with them, or we take some of those courses. But it's not usually something that we've kind of grown up with or through, or it's been expected. Python is fairly friendly. Right? It's fairly friendly in terms of its syntax. So if you're not a programmer, you're probably familiar with a few of the horror stories or programming jokes that go around about how you left semicolons off the end of your statement and all sorts of terrible things happen and so on. Python sets most of that aside, so it's fairly friendly. The other reason we're going to use it is that Python is really, I like to think of it as kind of the glue language. So if you think about having some sticky plasticine or some putty, you can shape that into almost anything you need. And if you have things that are better at doing certain things, and there are languages that are much better than Python for very particular purposes, but they're usually not so good at working with each other. And so Python can be the glue that stitches these other pieces and these programs together. You're able to write lots of code in Python fairly easily. But it comes with a lot of libraries built in. And so this is, or easily accessible. And this is other code that people have written that you can take advantage of very quickly without having to write it yourself. Of course, you have to read the documentation and see all that, but I'm going to try and push all that away for you today and do a full walkthrough for you. I'm going to do a full walkthrough for you of a notebook that I've built that will show you how to draw data from the Twitter API. What is an API? An API is an acronym. It stands for Application Programming Interface. It's a very fancy word for running a piece of software out there on the internet somewhere, probably where the web page that you're looking at is running, and you send it information, and you send it information through a fancy URL. Right? So in that address bar in your browser, there are these long HTTPS, HTTP:// things. And for the most part, they're fairly simple and you can read them. When we start using an API, an application programming interface, we're now going to pass information to the web server through that browser, address bar, basically. We're going to do it in the background so you don't see it in the address bar and so on, but that's basically what we're putting together. And those strings, those lists of text, will get very long and very complicated, and you do not want to build it by hand. And so we're going to use the tools at Python, and the people who have built some programs to plug into Python have built for us to construct this for us. We're going to need to do some fancy things like authentication. And for those of you who are following along today, this is probably where you're going to get a bit of a snag. I'm going to provide you some of my credentials because there aren't very many of us today. And so for the purposes of this workbook, you can pretend to be me as far as Twitter's concerned. I'm not worried about that. So we're going to look at three things. We're going to attempt to look at three things. We're going to run out of time at some point, but I will work very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. We'll spend most of our time on Twitter. Two reasons for that. One, it's pretty popular. Right, there's lots of things that you can do with Twitter. And the second reason is of all the workbooks that I'm building to help people in the humanities and social sciences do this kind of data collection work from the live web. It's the workbook that is the most put together. It's the most robust. There's only one or two things that I think it's missing. We'll also look at Facebook. Facebook has made some recent changes, and the libraries that support those changes for Python haven't caught up yet. So I did some discovering of this earlier this week. And so we're not going to be able to go quite as far as I had hoped. But you'll have seen the basics, and you'll still be able to do a few things with Facebook. I'll be able to walk you through that. The very last one that we'll spend some time on, and I'll show you a notebook for, is how to scrape information from newspaper sources that are online. So if you were interested in the Globe and Mail or the Star or most large news sites, whether in Canada or elsewhere, you'll be able to use this tool to pull a lot of data. And there's some production services that are actually built on the code that I'll show you that I helped prototype in early stages. So that's where we are, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So please bear with me. I've probably been in enough Zoom meetings right now. You know that sometimes this doesn't go well. So give me about 15 seconds here, and I should be able to share my screen. to open up a new browser window here. And this is the standard view that I get when I log into Colab. So we get a little pop-up window, and this is Google's collaborative code writing tool, right? It can be very similar to working, say, in a Google Doc or something like that, but with code. Makes it easier for you to share things around. So I'm going to load an instance of it. You can load the code that I'm going to be using as well. It won't be in a shared programming environment in the sense that your cursor's in the same window that mine is in, but the way the notebooks are set up, you should be able to follow along pretty directly. So if you have this screen with this kind of yellowy orange menu bar on top, that's great. Some of you might not have it, or if you got in here and you clicked off to the side, because that's what happened, then you'll see something that says welcome to the Collaboratory, and you see a little screen here, a little window here on the side that you can scroll through that gives you some examples about the sorts of things that you can do here. If this is what you have instead of that pop-up menu, then you're going to click File, and you're going to choose Open Notebook. And it will bring you back to this state of affairs. So there's some example code that you can use and you can look through. I'm going to talk a little bit about Markdown today, which is a very lightweight text formatting syntax. But if you want to know more, you can come here and see that sort of thing. If you've done work here in the past, there's a recent tab, and so it'll show you workbooks that you've used with the Collaboratory recently. If you have things that are saved in Google Drive that you've shared with the Collaboratory, they're here for you as well under Google Drive. You can upload your own things on the right-hand side, but what we care about today is GitHub. So if you haven't heard about GitHub, it's the 10,000-pound gorilla in the code sharing space, recently purchased by Microsoft. A lot of worries about the community about how that would work out, but it seems to be working out pretty well. They made a lot of things free that weren't before, and it just continues to grow. So on here is what's referred to our repositories. And so these are places where people or groups put code that they want to share with other people. So the repository we're going to use today, and I'll type it out here and then I'll paste it into the bottom of the chat, is UAlberta, right, for the University of Alberta, and that's technically where I'm stationed, even though my work is national. UAlberta-RCG, and that stands for UAlberta Research Computing Group. So I'm going to paste that at the bottom option of our menu here, not our menu, our attendance list. And so if you forgot that, that's where it is. So once I put that in, all of a sudden you get some new information underneath. So it asks me what repository I want to have from that group, right? And it asks me something about a branch. So we're not going to do, well, we are going to do Twitter first, right? So if you have something else selected, if you click that set of up-down arrows, you get a little drop-down list and choose ualberta-rcg/Twitter_API. So you're going to choose that. This branch option, one of the nice things that Git does, because it's really a version control tool. You probably had the problem when you're writing documents that you've made a whole lot of changes and you don't know who made them and you'd like to undo some, and that's really hard. The versioning, that problem exists when writing code as well. So versioning usually has what's referred to as a master branch, but then you can split off copies of the code called branches, and you can edit that code without interfering with your master branch. In the same way you can break a document partway through editing it, you can break your code, and you don't want to break code that you're sharing. So typically we share the master branch and put other branches off. There isn't any other option there for this because I'm just using the master branch, but if you see that somewhere, that's why. There's two notebooks here. One is called Twitter Scraping for Researchers. That's the old notebook, and that will be removed shortly. The one you want right now is Twitter_API for researchers, a walkthrough. So if you click on that, what Google Colab will do is it will reach out to GitHub, grab that notebook, pull it into Colab, and open it up inside. So we're going to be inside this browser environment and able to actually run the Python code. You didn't need to install a single piece of software on your machine, right? And you can't hurt this notebook. Right? You can hurt it in the sense that you change the code, now it doesn't run for you anymore, but you can't actually hurt my copy of it. It's still available for other people to draw down on, and so on and so forth. If in the future, when you're feeling more comfortable and you've made some edits or you think there's some changes, you can make those changes and you can actually push them back to GitHub. And I vet them and say, yeah, those are great, let's do it. But we won't worry about that today. But that's some of the nice integration that's been set up here for us by Google. So lots of preambles here, and if you don't like me talking, you can just read through this whole notebook. It's pretty robust in terms of the walkthrough that's there. Some acknowledgements at the start to Victoria and Miranda for helping me test this kind of work. They're interested in pregnancy and fitness on social media, and so we help them do a lot of work with that, and they help me. They're very kind to help us test this. So basic familiarity with the Jupyter Notebook environment. You don't need that for today, but if you were to do this on your own, that would be a helpful thing. You need a functioning Python environment on the system. Google Colab is giving us that today, so you don't need to install anything. That you have a developer account with Twitter. You probably don't have that, but I will show you how to get that today. And when we get to that point, you're either going to need to borrow my credentials with a few caveats, or you'll just be following along and watching at that point. That you have an app created on Twitter. The word app here is slightly overloaded. It's probably more intimidating than it sounds. We're not actually building an app that you're going to plug in on your phone or install on your desktop or something like that. It's more the declaration of an app, which will be this notebook. This notebook is going to be our app. And then number 5, we are not going to do today. It would take too much time for us to do. But one of the reason it's there is because if you start scraping a lot of information from Twitter, you probably want to keep it somewhere. And you want to keep it somewhere that you're going to be able to find what you've kept really quickly, and you're going to be able to reorganize it as you need it. And you're going to be able to add information to it. And just storing what you scrape in a regular text file makes that really, really hard to do. And so you're going to want a database for that. And the standard database for doing this kind of work is called Mongodb. And so the very end of this notebook walks through how to use Mongodb, but we're not going to get there today. It also can be a bit of a challenge to use on Colab. It's a good reason to install Python on your local machine. We're not going to get to that. And the last thing is number 6, that really needs you to pay attention to some of the notes around the cells. So if you use this notebook later and you're running into trouble, please read those notes around the cells. If they're not helpful, you're welcome to reach out to me. I'll be happy to help you. Yeah. So with that said, let's get to work here. Now, some of a Google Notebook, a Jupyter Notebook that Google is providing us here through Colab has 2 different types of cells. The first type of cell is a text cell, right? You can just write some text, and that's what we've done here on the top. And so if I take my cursor and I hold it over top of this cell and I click on it twice, it's going to open up this editing window where I can actually change the text here. So if you want to make notes around the cells that we're using today that are the code cells, this is a great way for you to do it. So you can double click on it to open it up. And when you're done, you can hold the shift key, press enter, and it will run that cell. And for those text cells, what it means is it's going to take the text and it's going to format it for you. So I'm going to double click here again, just so you can see this layout set up. What you see here on the left-hand side, this is Markdown, right? And so for the most part, it looks like regular text, right? This notebook was written by, right? But then we start to see some some formatting shifts here. So we see a square bracket, my name, closing square bracket, open parentheses, mail to John.Simpson. And that's not normally how we'd write a document. But what that does when it formats it is it sticks a link on top of my name. So you can click my name in this notebook and you can get my email address. And if you look through the rest of the stuff on the left-hand side, this is what Markdown looks like, right? If you want to have a heading, you put a single hash in front of it or a single pound sign, holding shift and pressing 3 on your keyboard. If you want a secondary one, you just put 2 in, right? And you'll notice it gets a little smaller on the right-hand side. If you want a third level one, you put in 3, right? And so that's what Markdown is. So I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to press enter and I'm going to get out of there. And we're going to actually start to use the Twitter API now. So Twitter space API, right, is the interface that Twitter has created for you to access information from it. Twitter no space API is the unfortunately named library that allows one library that's unfortunately named, is a way to put it, that allows us to access Twitter. There are other libraries that you can plug into Python to do it. I'm using Twitter no space API to access the Twitter space API because it was pretty powerful. It allowed us to do a lot of work and it was pretty straightforward. The libraries change over time. The endpoint or the place that they're trying to access changes as well. This may not be the best tool to use in a year, but it was a good tool to use for the past 2 years anyways. So when we click down here, we have a code cell, and underneath you see a whole lot of information about this requirement already being satisfied. That's being carried over from the last time that I used this Jupyter notebook and then copied its contents up to GitHub. So we want to run this cell. And what we want to do is we want to install the Twitter no space API on our system. And the system here is on Google Colab, whatever little bit of hardware that Google has set aside for you to run your notebook. And you can do that just by clicking the play button here. So I'm going to click that cell. It can also tells you other ways that you have to run that cell. So you've seen shift and enter. There's control and enter as well. I'm just going to click that little piece. First thing it's going to tell me is that, whoa, Google didn't make this notebook. Are you okay with that? That's an open question. You have to decide if you trust me or not. If you want to follow along, you probably should click this. So I'm going to say run anyway, and it's going to spin, and now it's going to go through some steps. It's going to tell you what it's doing. It's going to collect the Twitter API. You're going to see a whole lot of things that are already satisfied. Those are dependencies. And when it's all done, at the very bottom, you should see it saying that it's successfully installed Twitter API 2.5.13, which is the versions for it. So what we've done here is the equivalent of go to a library and get a book, right? We got a book and we just put it in our house somewhere. We now have the book, right? And we should all have the book. For us to actually do anything with what's in the book, we have to get the book and we have to open it up. So that's what we're going to do in the next step here, right? So from Twitter API, so from the book that I got from the library that we're going to call Twitter no space API, I want to import, which let's consider this the fancy word for open to chapter, right? So let's run that. So I see somebody's got a module not found error here. We'll run this. And you shouldn't have anything come from this, right? Why? There's a principle in programming languages that you're seeing here called silence is golden. And I'll get to you, Lisa, in just a second. There's a principle here called silence is golden. And that simply means that if I'm not supposed to do something based on what you asked, or you did not explicitly ask me to do something, particularly tell you that I did it, I'm not going to do it. You'd find that annoying, right? If every time you ask somebody to do anything, they just came back and told you that they did it, that would start to get kind of frustrating. So that's what's being applied here. If you're getting a module not found error here on this line from Twitter API, import Twitter API, that's a big flag that it's basically saying, I can't find that book. I can't find that book that you got from the library. And given the way that the program's set up, it's not like our houses and it's like, oh, I just couldn't find the book. It means that the book's not there, right? That's 99.9% of the time. So try running the code above again. And if you do not see that successfully built, successfully installed Twitter API, that's why you're going to get a module not found here. So give that a try again, and let us know, Lisa, if that works for you. So once we load it, now we're ready to go. We're ready to do some stuff, but we're going to need to do some authenticating, right? We're going to need to tell Twitter who we are. And so this section talks about how to do that authentication. And so you can read through here, but I'm going to summarize it for you. You're going to need a developer account, right? This assumes that you already have a Twitter account. So that's the first step. Once you have a Twitter account, you're then going to apply to Twitter for a developer account. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. The developer account, once the permission is granted, will allow you to use Twitter in a number of interesting ways. One, you'll be able to pull down data at scale, right? You'll be able to say, give me all the tweets that have hashtag, I don't know, hashtag Trump, right? Or I want all the tweets that say hashtag pizza. Or I want all the tweets that say hashtag and then the very long special URL for your conference. And you'll be able to pull those tweets down and collect them all at once. Unlike opening your browser, typing it in, copying, cutting, and pasting, and scrolling through the screen, this will clean all that up for you. The other thing it will let you do, we do not cover it here, but a future version of this workbook will, is how to actually push data to Twitter. So you may have heard about bots. A bot is just a bit of programming, often done in Python, but could be another programming language that has a developer account and is pushing information to Twitter. So they'll often read through the Twitter stream, all the sets of tweets that people have. And when they see certain things, they'll then push a message to that person. Hey, really nice tweet. Oh, that's a great tweet. That's the best tweet. Fortunately, all the bots aren't that nice, but this is the kind of thing that you can do as well. So let's actually go to the Twitter developer pages. So I'm going to open a new browser tab here, and I'm going to type developer or dev. I think I can get away with dev.twitter.com. Yeah. I'll type that in at the bottom of our attendance list here as well, because it's the next URL that you need, just so you have it on a long-term basis. Twitter.com. So I already have a developer account and I have a Twitter account. If you come here and you just have the Twitter account, you should be able to, there should be an option up here in the top right. One of those menu choices, you'll be able to pull it down and basically apply for an account. I believe that's actually what the menu option is. When you do that, Twitter's going to ask you some information. And very particularly, it is interested in what you're going to do with this data. This is one of the ways that Twitter is trying to fight back against some of the bad actors that have been making use of Twitter, right, for online harassment and so on and so forth. So they're interested in what you're going to do. As an academic, you're familiar with the ethics protocols that you need to go through and so on and so forth. So be upfront with them. Tell them what you're planning to do. And you know, they should say yes. If they don't say yes, probably within like a week, something's wrong, like really wrong. It took them 2 months to say yes for mine, and that was my fault, not theirs. I had swapped which browser window I was doing, which browser tab I was doing my application in, and so it kind of got fractured, and it took me a while to find that. So yeah, good luck with that, Lisa. I wish you all the best. So, but once you're in here and you are approved, you will have some options. And so the first thing that you're going to need to do is create an app. And as I said before, you're not really writing the app here. You're declaring the app, right? You're declaring the piece of software that's going to use these credentials, right? And so I've got a number of different apps here that I'm going to use. So I'm going to click here, create a new app for this workshop, right? And I'll just call it ACE workshop. And I'll just say demo app for training. So they're going to want a website URL. You're going to have to provide one. You can spoof it here. You can just put in anything, like you don't really check it, but what you should really do is put in something that's kind of related to you or points to the work that you're doing. So I'll put in www.compucanada.ca. So we want to sign in with Twitter. Right? We can click that little button. We can figure out what that means. I'll just show you quickly what it means here. Right? So sign in with Twitter, to place a button so you can click on things with your app and it would actually sign in. So that's not a feature that we need. We're not building that kind of an app. So we can leave that alone. And we should be able to leave the rest of this stuff blank. These things like the privacy policy and the terms of service URL, they're going to be much more important when we get to Facebook. So last thing I need to do is say how it's going to be used. This app. See how fast I can type 100 characters here. Used just because we're doing a demo and I'm not going to make you watch me type so much, I'm just going to paste that a whole bunch of times. Yeah, so it gives me a bunch of reminders, just being sensitive about government use and surveillance and automation. So we're not worried about those right now. So we get an app, right? And this is the description of the app. And so if somebody looked up your app through the developer website or other things, this is what they would see, right? They'd be able to see what it does and how it works. What we need from here, so if we come back to the notebook really briefly here, there's two different ways of authenticating, right? There's Open Authentication 1 or OAuth 1 and Open Authentication 2. Most of what all of what we're going to do today will allow us to do OAuth 1. Why would we use OAuth 2? It allows us to do a little bit more work for some very specific tasks, but OAuth 1 is kind of the Swiss Army knife for everything that we need. So both of these are going to require an API key, an API secret, an access token, and an access token secret. So I'm going to show you how to get those once you have the app set up. Once you have your app, and I'm inside it, ACENET Workshop, I'm looking at the app details right now, but there's another tab here called Keys and Tokens. I'm going to click on this. It gives me the API key and the API secret key, right? But I'm going to need the other pieces as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Generate. Right? And it's going to open these tokens up for me. It's only going to show them to me once, and then it's going to hide them. And if I ask for them again, it's going to give me new keys, right? Or new tokens here. And all these are just special passcodes, right? They're just fancy names for special passcodes. We'll set aside the difference between keys and tokens. It don't matter for us right now. Why the secrecy with the tokens? The tokens are secret because once they're out there, this app is attached to you in your account, and anything that happens on it is your responsibility. Right, so if somebody had access to these, they could start sending a whole bunch of angry hate bot stuff around on Twitter. They could, right, and then it would be attributed to you because you're the owner for this account. Some people don't care about that, and some people do. And so the secrecy around the tokens is to try and maintain that authenticity as much as possible. So I'm going to trust you today because you're new, got a whole lot of no's here, you don't even know how to use Python, and we're learning, and so you're going to be able to use some Python through these notebooks after today. And I'm just going to reset these at the end of today. So I'm going to share these with you in a moment. So you're going to watch me copy and paste them into my workbook, and then I'm going to paste that code onto the bottom of the attendance sheet, and so that you can use it for the rest of this work session. But then at the end of it, I'm just going to reset these, right? So there won't be a problem. So I'm trusting you here. So this is the first way that I'm trusting you. The second way that I'm trusting you is once you have these keys and tokens, I'm going to ask that you don't run cells until I flag that you can run the cells. The reason for that is this. There is a rate limit and a quota on the number of calls that you can make to the Twitter API over time. And there's 40 of us, and we can overrun that limit, right? It's entirely possible to do that. I'm okay with you overrunning the limit, right? But I should be able to run the first cell so that we can have an example so that everybody can see it first, right? Because if we can't do that, then we got a problem. So please hold back, right? Please hold back on running the stuff, and just know as well that these will get thrown out after the session's over. So if you come back in and try and use the notebook, you're going to need your own keys and tokens. So I'm going to start by copying the access token. It copies it to my clipboard. I'm going to come back here for Twitter API, and I'm going to into our notebook, and I'm going to paste it on top here, and you can see that change. I'm going to come back here to the developer page. I'm going to copy the access token secret. Come back here. I'm going to copy it into where it says access token secret. So I've got both of those. I'm going to close this now, and you can see that they were generated, but you can't see them anymore. So you regenerate them, it's going to overwrite those, and you're going to have to go through all the code and replace it, which isn't a problem for us, and we only got one workbook, but you can have some complicated stuff that's going to need that. And the same thing here. I'm going to take the API key, but here I've got to highlight it. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come back here, and there's the API key, and so I'm going to paste it on top. And I'll go back here and I'll get the last one. Oh, did it get it? Nope, it didn't paste the right thing. I did a copy. I'll copy this in here as well. Okay, so there's a lot of copying and pasting. But once you've done it and they're saved in the notebook, you don't have to do it again, as long as you don't have any security concerns and need to reset them. So I'm going to copy and paste this into the bottom of our attendance list. What you need to do is copy and paste it exactly as it's written. So don't press space, don't delete it, don't whatever on top of this, because you have a whole lot of people that are all sharing this bit of text right now. So please be respectful from that. If you slip up, that's fine. You can probably undo it by holding Control or Command, depending on your operating system, and pressing Z for undo. So before you run it, let's be clear about what you're doing here. So if you haven't used Python before, you're not familiar with programming languages, what we're setting up here is a variable that we're calling API_key. And we're going to give that variable a value. And that value is a string. The string is just a set of characters. And you see that in the quotes that are here, right? So we've got single quotes around this. Capital F, capital O, capital H, right? And the same thing for API key, secret, access token, and access token secret, right? So what I'm able to do once these are passed into the memory is I can call these long, complicated strings, not by typing them out again, but by just saying API_key. So I'm going to click run here, and you can all click run here to load this. Right, and again, nothing should happen. If you get an error here, there's a problem in the code that you have. So let's say you didn't capture the very last single quotation mark at the end of access secret token when you were copying. If I was to run this, it's going to tell me I got an error, right? End of line, that's what EOL stands for, while scanning string literal. Well, I know what the problem is because I broke it on purpose. Is missing a single quote. So if you copied it straight in, you should be able to click play here, no problem at all, and you can all do that. Next thing we need to do is we need to set up for authentication, right? And so we're going to authenticate here. And there's two forms, right? There's two forms. And just before this, right, there's this big important piece, right? So we need to make sure that we've run that cell above, even though it doesn't give us any output when it runs well. So right under OAuth Authentication 1, we're going to click this little, everybody can do this. It's not going to bump into anybody else. We're going to run this. What's this going to do? Well, we're going to use the Twitter API content that we loaded, right? And we're going to pass it the key, the secret, the access token, and the access token secret. So that's all getting passed into Twitter API, and it's going to generate the beginning of that long URL that it's going to pass to Twitter. And it's going to have all this information baked into it so that we don't have to write it out by hand. The second thing that happens here, and so that creates all that, and it puts it in a variable called API that we're naming. API, because it was created by the Twitter API library, has certain properties, right? And so we can use one of these properties. It's called the authentication content, right? So here we're using it through this dot method. So API, and then it has a subcomponent called AUTH. This is in the documentation for the Twitter API. And when we run this, it's going to show us where the authentication information is. So it shows us that it exists, right? And so it's at this memory location. We don't care where that memory location is. We just care that this object is returned and it tells us that it works. What you need to not do now that we have this authentication set up is to not run the cell under OAuth 2. And that's why I have a big warning here, right? If you run OAuth 2, it's going to lock you out from a number of things you can do in the rest of the workbook. So that's why we have point number 6 up top. So now that we're authenticated, let's actually see what a tweet is, right? And so we'll see what a tweet is. I'll be able to show you how to read from the stream, and I'll show you the beginnings of how to walk back through Twitter and through the archives of Twitter. And then there'll be a whole lot of this notebook that we don't cover today, because we're going to move over and we're going to look at Facebook, and we're also going to look at the newspaper thing. But we're perfectly on time right now for where we're going to go. So my hope is when we're done with this Twitter notebook, that you'll be set up to go forward and do some playing on your own. If you've never used Python before, you're new to the Twitter API, well, it might be a few spots you struggle with a little bit, but this should be a massive boost for you, and you'll be able to get some progress done. And if you get stuck, I can help you. And I'll even volunteer Lydia to help you too. So what is a tweet? So here's where I'm going to start making requests that you don't run cells until I run them, because we're going to start making calls, and we can start to run into snags where we get overloaded because we've asked for too much too fast, and Twitter will throttle us. And that might still happen here, even with us holding off. And I'm comfortable with that, and I hope you are as well. It just makes it more real. So the first thing we're going to do here is we created this API object. This is the thing we built with the keys and the tokens up top. We used it to show us that we had the authentication component in it. We just did that. It has another function inside it that we're going to called request. Right? And so we are going to request from the statuses endpoint, right? There's different endpoints in this API. It's basically a different ending of a URL. And so when we point to a different end part of a URL, we can ask it for different information. And so we're going to ask it to give us the status of of a tweet, right? We want it to show us a tweet. And then we have this fancy %D. And what this is going to allow me to do is just really cleanly just pass in this value with this % operation. So it's going to grab this and it's going to insert it into the end of the URL. It just makes your code cleaner in the long term. It's a little bit more complicated here. We can set that aside. And then what I want it to do is I want it to print R. So I'm going to run this, and then I'm going to run the cell after it, and then I'll let some of you run it. So the first thing I'm going to run here is this. Right. And so I run it, and it's going to print R for me. So it goes and it gets all this information, and then it puts it in a variable called R, and then we print R. Like we just show R on the screen. Well, R doesn't really look like much, right? Like R is like, what is this? Well, it's something that exists at this memory location, 0x7fc, whatever, but that's not helpful for us. But this is helpful for us because it tells us this exists, but this is not how you access what's inside R, right? It's like R is some really complicated house, and you're like, there's the house. And you're like, it doesn't even look like a house. But once we start asking for the rooms inside, we'll be able to find it, right? So that's what we're going to do in the next one, right? And so I'm going to run r.text. Notice I don't have the print around it. This is a cheat you can do in Jupyter Notebooks. You don't have to put print if you just have a single kind of command or declaration or object in that piece. It'll just give you the output for that. So if I run that, I'm going to get the content of that tweet, right? And that is what that tweet is, right? That's it. That's the whole tweet right there. So if you want, you can run the thing above. You can do that API request, only run it once, and then you can run the R text. And you should see the same stuff that I'm seeing here, right? If you wanted, if you knew the ID for a different tweet, you could put that in here, right? And it would fetch that tweet for you. Every tweet has an ID. Doesn't mean that just because you have the ID, you can get the tweet though. There are some tweets that have been deleted or otherwise removed or redacted. So here's the content of that tweet. Now that's really messy to look at, right? That's the first thing you see is like, whoa, what the heck is that? And the second thing that you'll notice is that that's a lot more than 140 characters. There's more going on here than you might expect, right? So that's really interesting. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail, right? And so we are going to do that using the JavaScript object notation library. So this, you can plug it in very easily into Python. It's already loaded. It's part of the what's called the Python standard library. So we don't need to install it. It's already there. But we do need to actually open it up so that we can use it. If we opened up everything in Python, it would just get really, really slow. We wouldn't use most of it. So we're just opening the things we need as we need them. So we're going to import JavaScript object notation, JSON. And what this is really a way of parsing what Python calls dictionaries, right? And so these are key value pairs. So you might imagine a key being the name, things I like, right? And then there'd be a list inside that things I like. I like ice cream. I like cars. I don't really like cars. I like bicycles. I like puppies, all sorts of things like that, right? And so by saying, John, show me the things John likes. Here's the things John likes. Here's the key. Give me all the values. That's what's going to happen with JSON. And there's lots of data on the web that's kept this way because it's very mutable, it's very flexible. And if you work with tweets a lot, you'll see this is needed because some tweets have information that other tweets don't. And so having a very rigid framework isn't going to work well for tweets and Twitter because they keep changing what's in the background. So we're going to run this. It's going to import the library. It's then going to use the JSON library. It's going to use the load S. It looks like loads, but this stands for load string. So we're working with raw text, and we're going to pass it the text from r.text. And remember up here, r.text gave us this whole long set of stuff here, right? It actually truncates it. So we want to see the whole thing. So we're going to create this new variable called parsed R, which just means that we've sliced it up and formatted it nicely. And so it's going to, well, the parsed R, as it means, it's going to treat it as a JSON object versus just text. So that's the parsing piece. And then we're going to print it. And we're going to add some nice features. We're going to indent things 3 layers. So there are children and parents as concepts in here. And so the children will be nested underneath. So for example, you have an address, right? That might be a parent. And then that address probably has rooms in the house, and so those would be children. And then the rooms in the house might have chests of drawers, and so those could be children of the rooms, and so you can walk your way through it that way. And each child is going to get indented 3 times. We're also going to sort the keys. They're not sorted by default. Python doesn't need that. It's very, very fast, and it'll organize things in the way that they're used. But if you want to sort them for human readability, you can do that. So we should all be able to run this. It's not making any calls. And so here's what it is, right? And so you can scroll through this and you can see all the content that's in the tweet. Right? So what we want is the text of this tweet, right? And the text of this tweet here says, from my hometown, this is a Cheyenne translation of Black Lives Matter, and we have a whole bunch of other information here. That, you know, these are fancy, what you're seeing here, you're seeing some fancy characters that can't just normally be displayed. So they're getting these ASCII codes that are going to show what those characters are. If you want to see the actual content of that tweet, you should be able to click that link at the far right-hand side. And so I'll just do that right now. The reason we're using this tweet is I had a researcher come back and was very interested in being able to grab media content from tweets, which the first version of this notebook didn't do. It just grabbed text. And so this version does that, and it also has the benefit of showing you some stuff that you wouldn't normally see, some very special characters. And so this is what that tweet looks like when it's posted, right? So we have this photo, and we also have some very special characters that don't display normally in a raw text environment. So you're seeing those as well. And you're also seeing the content that we can read, which is from my hometown. So that's there, but there's lots of other stuff that's in here too. There's a lot of information in a tweet, right? We can find out information on who posted it. Sometimes they have geotagging information turned on. You can follow that. Sometimes they'll tell you where they're located that may or may not be true, but you can grab that kind of information. Anyways, there's lots of stuff here. And the point here is for you to see that a tweet is really, really big. It's more than just the content of the tweet body that people think it is. When it was created, who actually tweeted it, or some descriptions about them. Right? All this stuff is in there, and it's all attached to every single tweet. So that's there. There's a screen name of the person who posted that one. I should probably ask if she's okay with this, but we'll assume so for now. So anyways, you see there's a lot of stuff there. It's much nicer to read, but that's more than what you want in most cases. You probably just want a few pieces. So underneath here, this shows you how to get just particular components of that tweet body. And so I'm gonna just click here so you can see it run. And so we're gonna print, and we're gonna print the string tweet body with a colon followed by a space. Well, you're gonna see that right here in that first line. And then from the parsed text variable, we're going to access the text key, right? And that text key is from my hometown, right? A translation of Black Lives Matter. And here we see, because we're actually printing it on the screen, we see the proper rendition of all those characters, right? From Cheyenne, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, I apologize. But we can also get the tweet ID and the screen name and so on and so forth. So So we can do that. We're going to skip the next one here. It's just a fancier way to do all that work, but it's not necessary for us right now. And I want to show you how to actually grab some streaming tweets. You can grab more things from the API, and there's a section here called Accessing the Entire API. So you can look through that. You'll see a parenthetical note here that needs to be updated. So this is still kind of new, but it shows you how to access any of the endpoints and shows you what they all are. If you're curious what you can get. I want to show you streaming and standard search, and then we'll move on. So I'm going to click the little arrow to the left of the title here, streaming, and it'll open up this section here. Really important here is this line here. When you're streaming, so I'll tell you what streaming means in a moment. It's possible for your code to run indefinitely. Streaming means that you're setting up a little program that's going to watch what's called the Twitter stream. And so Twitter is publishing tweets constantly, just constantly. And this little program will watch that. And anytime it sees a tweet that meets some criteria that you have, it's going to reach in and it's going to grab that tweet. It's going to grab that tweet. It's going to grab that tweet, and it's going to save them for you and stick them here on the screen or save them to your machine if you set them up to do that. You need to know up front that unless you're going to pay Twitter, there's no guarantee that you're going to get all the tweets that have that property, right? You can get many of them, but it'd be really hard for you to guarantee that you have them all. The second thing you need to note is that there are certain, well, there's other things that matter here in terms of the tweets that you're getting. One is, are there any tweets with that property at all, right? So there's a researcher I'm working with, and they're really interested in different presentations of heart attack versus cardiac arrest versus, well, if you put in hashtag cardiac heart attack, or even not even the hashtag, just search for the term heart attack, you get a lot of hits for that. If you start putting in cardiac arrests, you get even fewer. And if you put in myocardial infarction, you are not getting any tweets. So they came back to me after a while, like, John, your thing's broken. We're not getting any tweets. Well, the thing wasn't broken. You can search for terms that people are not publishing on Twitter. So you're going to have to play around here. So my recommendation here is you start with something that you know is going to get you hits, and then you narrow down from there. The other thing you need to keep in mind is that you can run up against a rate limit. So if what you're asking for would return, I don't remember if it's 1% or 0.1% of all the tweets coming out of Twitter, Twitter will cut you off. They'll just close it to say, this is going to demand too much and we're not going to give it to you. And so you're going to see that, well, you would see that if you put in Trump for the track term here, right? So keep that in mind, and wait just a second here as we run this. So I'm gonna, I don't know why we have some failed code here underneath, but hopefully this will clear up. So I'm just gonna search for COVID, right? So watch me do this first, don't run this yet. I'm gonna click run here, and then I'm gonna click the stop button. Notice how the play button turned into a stop button, little circle with a square inside it, because this will just run constantly, right? It'll just run and it'll eat everything. So you should each be able to run this right now. So swap the term to something. Doesn't matter what you want to search for. You don't have to search for COVID. You can search for anything you want. Run it for a second and press stop. If you put Trump in there and you try to run it for 2 seconds or something like that, Twitter is very likely going to stop you for you, right? Because there's just so many tweets going out with that word somewhere in them, in the hashtag, in the text, the body text, it's going to be there. So what we see coming back here, right, is anything that's got COVID in it somewhere, right? Could be, could be elsewhere in some of these tweets. It's hard to really kind of tell. Here's some with clear COVID. You can see that uppercase, lowercase, doesn't matter. I'm just printing the text body here. What we got here? Yeah. So, but anyways, this is kind of messy. And we'll set aside the whole setup here for how it's actually doing that with those iterators. So you are able to grab this content, right? So you can modify track term, and so you can grab this from the stream. You're going to want to be able to write this to a file, because just printing it on the screen, you're just going to cut and paste it into whatever you want. It's probably okay if you just want a few little snippets of things, but you probably want to save stuff. And so we'll show you quickly how to do that. So you notice how this block of code is building on the previous one, right? Where we had this 4-item in our get iterator piece before, which I'm going to set aside explaining for right now, but I'm happy to go through it with you later. We're now going to open a file on the system called streamtweets.csv, right? And we're going to load content into it. I think this works in Colab, so let me just check in. I'm going to run that. So here I'm just searching for the term potato. You can see we're getting much less stuff than COVID. It's not a popular term. And when I'm done, I'll just click stop. When I click stop, you see the error that comes in down here, keyboard interrupt. That's just Python saying, hey, you did this. I didn't do it. This is why we stop things. If we save a file, you probably want to be able to load that file, right? And so we called this file streamtweets.csv. And on the side here, on the side of Colab here, got a little menu option, show code snippets paid, and you have a little option here with a file folder. You can click on that file folder, and in there's streamtweets.csv. So you could click on the little vertical ellipsis there, and you could download it, you can delete it, you can rename it, you can do a bunch of things with it. So that's where all this data, there's only four lines here, got printed. So that's there for you. Very last thing I want to show you on Twitter before we have a quick look at Facebook and the newspaper. We'll skip this piece underneath, but you can read it and you can run it on your own later. Is this idea of the standard search. So I'm going to click the little arrow beside standard search here. So most of the stuff that you're going to want from Twitter is not going to come from things that are coming right now. That would imply that you somehow can tell the future and you know what the cool terms are going to be. If you know you want to study COVID, you do want to set up a stream follower, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, Margaret. Here you're getting an unauthorized error for the streaming code. That means that the API stuff didn't go through quite as cleanly as it should have, and I have to poke at it for you. So, but in hope is it should work. Ahmet asks about showing the replies on the tweet. It doesn't show the replies directly. It shows you that it's a retweet, but you can get a list of, there are ways for you to get the list of all the replies that were there in the tweet. I believe it's in one of the other endpoints. It's not something that I've done a lot of, but I know people are interested in it. We'll probably build it in the workbook in the future. The thought here is being, you get a tweet and then you want to find all the replies and all the replies to those replies, or maybe all the retweets and so on and so forth. Yeah, that is something that can be built. Standard search, point being, you typically need to go into the past. Twitter lets you go into the past for 7 days without a whole lot of hassle. If you want to go into the past 30 days, then you need to start using advanced features of your developer account. And the same for if you want to go back into the full API. You're going to start, those are called the premium access endpoints. If you're not paying Twitter, they will throttle you on this. So you'll be able to get, I think it's 25,000 tweets from the past 30 days per month. But if you want to go to the full archive, you're only able to get something like 5,000 tweets per month. So if you had a really big idea and it was all over Twitter, it would take you a long time to scrape it and you might not be able to do it. It's also important to keep this in mind because when you're doing development work with Twitter, you're using these kind of free sandboxes, you need to really make sure that you've either got lots of flexibility, it doesn't really matter, or you've really decided on what your search terms are, and that you're capturing the information as you search, because there's no going back to Twitter and being like, yeah, I got my 25,000 tweets, but I saved them on the screen and I lost them. Can I have them back? It's just not going to happen. They just won't pay attention to you unless you're special in some way that I don't know. So what we're going to do here is we're going to swap into the back. And so here's where we start to see some quota things come up. So you're here for the standard 7-day into the past search. The quota is so many hits on that endpoint per 15 minutes. And I think it's 15. And you'll see there's a note here of this get quota method here to see kind of where we are for that. So looking for COVID school outbreak, and here you see this -RT, which is a fancy way to say not. I don't want anything that's a retweet. And the reason this content's here is my wife's an infectious diseases doctor and advising the school boards on outbreaks. And so Twitter's a great place to find what schools have had outbreaks and kind of see where you might go looking for more information on how they're responding to that and why they might have had the outbreak in the first place. So I'm going to run this, and you can change that search term again. And you'll notice one thing happens. I didn't have to stop this, right? It just went and it grabbed some content, right? So it's going to grab us what it can, and it's going to show us what's available here for that. Again, it's just printing it on the screen. If I wanted to save it, I could use some of the methods above. And here in the bottom, I've got a quota. I've got 179 remaining. I started with 180 hits on this over, I believe it's a 15-minute period. And so some of you should run this cell as well. I'll answer your question in just a second, Laura. So you should run this cell as well, right? And I'm going to run it again, right? And when I run it again, you notice a couple things change, right? First, that the content changes, right? Why? Well, new tweets happened. New tweets were made that are pushing into this 7-day window. It's a scrolling window. So you want to run this as soon as possible to catch the tweets that are in that window, because they're getting pushed out, not by new tweets coming in, but by time rolling by. And so the first tweet here was the ellipsis, Trump wants to delay elections. But that's not the first tweet anymore. It's not the most recent one. That's the most recent one is now this at Bukhlarowski, yeah, may Almighty Allah accept all our prayers, right? So that's a new tweet here that's coming in with this, right? So that content's there, and you can grab it. If you want to go into the 30 days and so on, you're going to need the premium access, and you're probably also going to need paging. And so this is where I'm going to stop, but I'm just going to talk very briefly about what paging is. Twitter, when you're using, when you're going into the past, will return only so many tweets at a time. And it considers each block of tweets that it returns a page. And they're typically ordered in terms of tweet ID. So it'll start with the most recent one, and it'll go until it hits you. The most it'll typically return is 100 tweets at a time, typically less. It's just, this looks like 77, that's good enough for you. This is 50, it's good enough for that other person, because it's got so many people asking for stuff. You can try to force it to give you 100, but it still might not give you 100. Point is, if you want the other ones, you're going to need to then say, well, thanks for this first bit, but give me the next set. And thanks for that bit, but give me the next set. Paging allows you to do that, allows you to walk back chunk by chunk. So you can have a look at that section for that. And if you want to go into the 30-day or the full archive, you're going to need this premium access section. So I'll show you what that looks like, and then we'll be done with Twitter for now. Yeah, so we got a question here from Rosa in terms of this non-Latin alphabet. Haven't done a lot of work with non-Latin alphabet, so you can see some of the first starting work here with the tweet that we pulled down from the beginning. It's likely because that's not there, or that's not the format to ask for that in. you may need to convert those non-Latin alphabet characters to their ASCII codes, right? And then it may be able to find that. If you're having trouble with that, Rosa, it's an interesting problem. Lydia or I would probably love to I'm saying probably for Lydia, I certainly would be interested to chat with you about that after. And it may be the case that people aren't putting it there either, right? Like they're putting it in other ways. So there's possible there's another endpoint for different languages, but I don't know about it if there is. So I'm back in the Twitter developers page here, and there's a dashboard here. And I just want to show you this dashboard really quickly, because this is the dashboard that lets you track your use of the sandbox for these premium APIs. So this is the Search Tweets API, 30 days, premium products. I get 250 requests per month. Each of them can return up to 100 tweets. So there's a cap here. You can only get 25,000 tweets from the past 30 days per month. The full archive, you can see you can only request 50, make 50 requests on the full archive per month. Each of those will only return a maximum of 100 tweets. And so the absolute most tweets that you can get from the full archive will be 5,000. So, and I got to this by coming in here to the Twitter development area and clicking on the dashboard. There's some other pieces in here about how to use premium access and so on and so forth, but you should be able to follow through with them. If you get stuck, again, you can reach out to Lydia or I and we'll help you out with that. So point for here is, here's a notebook that you can run as long as you have a Google account. You can load it in Colab. You can call that notebook over from GitHub. This notebook is only going to improve over time. It's may not be super fast, but the next time I have pledged to do some updating for this is the fall. There's another set of training for that. And so we'll keep adding to it there so you can check back and see it. And it walks you through the process. If you're having trouble, so there's authentication things that aren't working out, or it's not able to find stuff, one of two things is likely the case. Either a cell has not been run, and there's a few cells up top that are really important to run. You need to make sure the software is installed. You need to make sure that it's open and available. You need to have those keys. And I'm fairly familiar with a number of the problems if I can see your stuff and I can help you through it. And so this should walk you through how to use the Twitter API fairly directly. And at the bottom, it shows you how to use the bottom of the notebook. There's something called extended tweets. That's covered here. You can get 280 character tweets. How do you handle them? You're seeing some of that in this truncation you're seeing earlier on, like where's the rest of this tweet? Those are because we have extended tweets and I haven't shown you how to handle those yet. You can page through the full archive. There's date ranges. You can be very specific about when you're doing your searches. There's other ways to control what you're searching for as well. You saw some of that with -RT. Don't give me retweets. I only want real things. That can be really important if you only can have so many tweets back, which is the case if you're not paying Twitter. And then the last one here is how to use a database. And this is how to actually make use of Mongodb. The installation stuff and so on is gestured at here, but you need to do that on your own. But again, this is a place where we can help you. So that's Twitter. I'm going to open up a new, I'm just going to overwrite this because you won't need it again. So I'm going to open up a new Colab page here. I'm going to do this next part a little bit quicker because you've already kind of seen it. I just want to show you the Facebook notebook, and I want to show you the newspaper notebook. The Facebook notebook, we're not going to spend a lot of time on right now because it's a mess. But it's there, and it'll be a start for you, and it's something that I'm going to continue to fix. This should be ready by the end of September. So I'm going to click on GitHub. I'm going to go to uAlberta-RCG. The repository that we're going to look at this time is the Facebook API. You're welcome to open that up. And the file that we want here is the Facebook API for researchers. I'm not sure what that other one is. I'll have to have a look at that. It's probably just a broken stub. So it loads. If there's any question, this is a development draft. It's trying to tell you that very clearly on the top. So very similar preamble to what you saw up top. And it was copied over from the Twitter notebook, which is much more mature. So you might see the odd reference to Twitter here. That's a mistake that I'll get around to. So I'm just going to walk through this and talk about a few points, and then we'll set this aside because it is not really development worthy. I'm struggling with it. You're definitely going to struggle with it, but I want to show you what's coming. So very similar, we're going to install Facebook. The software development kit, that's what an SDK is, and that's what they call the API tool. There's a number of different ones. The one we're going to use eventually here is Facebook-SDK. The exclamation point here allows you to actually run a line of code in these notebooks in the background as if it was being run on what's sometimes called the command line of the operating system. And if anybody here remembers DOS, it's basically that in the background. Here, though, on the Google servers, it's going to be a version of Linux. And so that's what they're running. And so pip is the Python package manager. And so we're going to run the Python package manager from the Python package index, but they've taken PPI and switched it to PIP because it's more fun. And then we're going to run the install command, and we're going to install the piece of software called Facebook SDK. Again, not authored by Google. We're going to run it anyways. Right? I need to import that library now. Well, we have to wait till it's done running. Important thing to note here is the Facebook SDK version is 3.1. To do a lot of the work with the new Facebook API, you're going to need version 4 of the SDK, and I'm having a hard time getting that installed, either on my own machine or here on Google Colab, so that's why we're not really going too far here. But this will work for this first little bit. I can import Facebook and JSON, and again, that's taking the books out of my basement and putting them on my desk to open them so we can make calls to them. Now here we come into an authentication need as well, right? So you're going to need a Facebook account if you want to interact with Facebook. And so once you have that account, you're then able to go to developers.facebook.com. I'm going to show you a little bit about what that looks like by clicking here. And the very first time you come in here, in the top right corner, you'll have an option that you don't see on my screen, and that option will be Get Started. So you can click on that and you can go through the process of creating an app. I already have some apps available, so I'm going to click on My Apps, and I'm very purposefully just being some hand wavy here because you've seen the Twitter one, and again, this one's not robust yet, but I've created this test app. It's kind of ready to go. And again, it's just a declaration of an app. I haven't actually built an app here in the sense that you think about it on your phone or anything like that. It's just some code that's going to talk to Facebook and pull some information. And so this is the dashboard for your app. And what you're going to care about at some point fairly quickly, if you're looking through the workbook there, is that you're going to need some codes. And so if you click on Settings and then Basic, here's an app ID, which we're not going to need up front, but here's that app secret. And again, it's blocked out, right? You can't see what it is. And I can click Show here. Right? It wants me to put in my password. I've got a password manager, so it pre-fills that in for me. Just to make sure it's you. We're going to click Submit, and then we get this long code, right? That's my code, and I would copy and paste that into the notebook where the app secret will be required. And again, I can reset that if I need to here. So that's what's being set up here. Once you're able to do this, right, it walks you through how to get the access token and so on and so forth, shows you what it looks like. Right, and you're able to do some very quick searches. I'm not going to run those because there's a bunch of copy and pasting you don't need to see right now. But you'll note that there's a few points here where it's not giving you everything that you need. And so you need to go back, you need to give it very, very explicit permissions. And if you were ever to publish your app, right, you wanted to make it public so that others could use it, or you could collect more information than you normally can from just a development version of it, you're going to need to have a privacy policy, and you're going to need to have a terms of use, and you're going to need to be able to point to those on the web for Twitter, for Facebook, sorry, to see and be able to check. I don't know what they actually do for checking. This is one of the new things that I still have to do, and I'll be able to report on for you at the end of September. So, and then there's a bunch of incomplete broken content below that things started getting really messy. And so I really had to back off on my hope from Facebook. Because if you find these walkthroughs on the web for how to use the Facebook API, they're all very, very simple and clean, but things have changed a lot recently. And those walkthroughs are not helpful anymore because so much has changed. So I'm going to build a new one that you'll be able to use. So that's all I'm going to show you for Facebook. The very last thing that we'll end with here, I'm going to go back to Collab. And I'm going to go back to GitHub. And I want to show you the newspaper one, which is pretty simple and it's pretty powerful. And it's the one that we'll leave off on today. Okay, so back to the University of Alberta repository. And so from the repository list, I'm going to choose newspaper scraper. And then there's only one notebook here. It's called newspaper_scraper, so I'm going to load it. This is one you should all be able to do. There's no special permissions or anything like that. You should just be able to run it. So there's a tool that when I first built this as a prototype, it was for this tool, and this tool has now gone public. And it does gender tracking of media, very particularly in terms of the experts that are being cited within those articles. What are the gender proportions? And in a first pass, they're just doing male female, but the intent long term is, can we expand our notion of gender, and how is that being presented in terms of the experts that are being asked and how they are being presented in terms of their gender in our media outlets. So this tool, and what you see underneath is underlying that tool that's linked at the top, and you're welcome to go have a look at it. So I'll just click through this really quick and then we'll be done. I expect this to work for all of you without question. There's no keys or tokens or anything like that, and you should be able to run. So we can install the software. Again, we have to first look code that we run in a notebook. Google wants us to know it's not there, so we just say run anyway. For me, these requirements have already been satisfied because I installed them just before we started here, but you'll probably take a little bit longer to run. Once we have the libraries in our house, we want to take the books or open the chapters up that we need from them. So they're called newspaper, and a thing called RE. RE is part of the Python standard library, so it's built into Python. You don't ever have to install it. And it stands for regular expressions. Regular expressions is a way of laser focusing in on chunks of code, not chunks of code, strings of text. So that say you had a very large document, say you had a list of all the libraries in Canada, and you wanted to have the postal codes for each of those. How are you going to find them? Like, you can't just search for postal code. Well, you can search for a pattern of text, and that would be letter, number, letter, space, maybe not, maybe, number, letter, number. And then you could search through the whole thing and you can collect all that out. So we're going to use regular expressions here to do some searching. Yeah, you know it's done, Laura, when the little play button goes away, and you should have a number. So if I move my cursor off this, you'll see in square brackets a little number that tells you that it's done. It tells you that it was the 5th thing that was run. And I'm like, John, that's not the 5th thing that you run. Well, I was running this notebook before we started this morning, so it still thinks it's the same notebook. So that's why that's happening for me. But yes, you know, when it says successfully installed and it stops spinning around the play sign, that's how you know you're done. When we import them, right, you see it started to move and then it just stopped. That's how you know it's done. So then we're going to create a variable called paper URL, and we're just going to point to the front end of a newspaper. You can change this. You can change it to the Globe and Mail. You can change it to Huffington Post. You can change it to kind of any news site you want. Some of them will have paywalls or access issues that will block you, but the star doesn't. So the star will work. And then we're going to create a variable called a newspaper. And what we're going to do from this is we are going to build a set of articles. And these are things that the star is currently publishing through something called an RSS feed. So real-time syndicated server, I forget what RSS stands for, but it's something like that. And so we're going to pass it the URL. We're going to tell it not to memorize the articles. This is important. If you don't have this feature on and you go back and you try to get those articles again, you're not going to have them. Why? Because newspaper is already storing them on your system and it's a pain in the butt to get. So we're going to tell it, don't remember these things. And we're going to tell it to basically pretend to be a Mozilla version 5 browser. That doesn't really matter. But I'm going to run it. It's going to go off and it's going to build this and it's going to query the star. And we know it's done because that little spinner around the top is done. And then I'm going to say print the length. So print len of paper.articles. So we have this object called paper. It has this sub component to it called all the articles inside it. And we want the length of it. And the Python command for that, the function for it is called len. And so that's what we're setting up here. We can see it got 72 articles. And so now we're going to walk through that set for each article in this object paper articles. I just want to print them on the screen. And this is the last thing we'll do here. And so if I run this, right, we can see what here we're printing is the article title, followed by the article URL, followed by the authors, followed by the summary. And it just vomits this up on the screen here. I actually have to scroll to the right to see all these things. But this is some of the information that you can pull from this. And there's a lot more that you can do with newspaper. So this is the end of hopefully me talking a lot, and hopefully a lot more of you asking questions and me being able to be helpful with your responses. So you've seen Twitter, you've seen the Twitter workbook, and what's potentially possible there. And there's a lot more that you can do on that front. You've seen the beginning of the Facebook workbook. It's being built up to look like the Twitter workbook, but there's been recent changes that the libraries haven't caught up with yet. And I could hack my way around them, but that would remove the hope that these notebooks can also show you how to do Python, right? Because the code would just get too hard. You wouldn't be able to read it easily. And then you also see this newspaper scraper, right? Which is another way of grabbing content from the web, particularly from media outlets, and grabbing those pieces. And there's more that can be done here as well. I just haven't built out the workbook. But if you're interested in that, we can help you do it. So here ends the formal piece.